Too often, housing conversations start after a project is already controversial. Our goal is to kind of pull back that curtain on the systems and institutions that shape those decisions long before they make headlines. Tonight, we're focusing on village planning committees, commonly called VPCs. We'll explore what they are, how they fit into this planning process, who participates in them, and why they matter for anyone interested in housing growth and neighborhood change. And then towards the end, we'll have a Q&A with our panelists. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared afterward with attendees. Please keep your microphones and cameras off throughout the presentation. If you have questions, submit them using the Q&A function or type in chat. We will reserve time toward the end of the program for audience questions. We also encourage you to use the chat to share resources, comments, and observations. And finally, we ask everyone to remain respectful. Tonight's discussion is intended to be educational. We're here to better understand how village planning committees function, not to debate any specific project or development proposal. With that, let's get started. Tonight, we are joined by three people who bring different perspectives on village planning committees, former to current members and housing advocates. First, we'll hear from Nicole Rodriguez. Nicole is the executive director and a founding member of Valley Urban Action Alliance, a Phoenix 501c3 for C4, advancing zoning reform, transit, and safer streets. She is president of Valley Urban's affiliated 501c3 Urban Phoenix Project. She is also a member of the Encanto Village Planning Committee. Also joining us is Paris Wallace. She is a mother of two, community organizer, and advocate committed to advancing social justice, reproductive rights, and equity in Arizona. As the Arizona senior organizer for state and local governance of Working Families Party and Working Families Power, Paris works to empower and mobilize working class families, identifying, training, and collaborating with candidates and elected officials to maintain close ties to their communities. Since 2019, Paris has served on the Estrella Village Planning Committee, helping shape community development, land use, and neighborhood priorities in one of Phoenix's most diverse and rapidly growing areas. And finally, Joe Barba. Joe is a skilled public affairs professional with over a decade of experience navigating the intersection of government, business, and community engagement. As a senior director of government affairs at First Things First, Arizona's early childhood agency, Joe spearheads the organization's government affairs and strategic advocacy initiatives, working to shape and influence policies and programs that directly impact early childhood development and education across the state. He is also a former chair of the Maryville Village Planning Committee. Nicole, let's start with you. Can you introduce us? What are village planning committees?
Yeah, no, thank you, Stephen. So I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. A little bit of what I'm going to talk about is the history of village planning committees. So quick story to start. When Phoenix planners first dreamed up this idea it was actually in the 70s, they didn't want to call them villages. Actually, they wanted to call them nodes. So picture it being like at a party and someone asked, where do you live? Where do you go? And your node area is, maybe like your telephone zip code, or excuse me, area code, but it's associated with land. So nodes is actually a really common term in the planning realm. So it was like nodes. And a local journalist heard node and said, it was about the dumbest word she'd ever heard, and threw out village instead as an alternative. So she was thinking, like, I guess you could think of like cozy porches, grandma's cookies, and it just stuck. And so now we call them, or since the beginning, really, villages. So instead of nodes. So and going into a little more into the whole concept of like why and how did the villages even come about is Phoenix is huge. It's one of the biggest cities in the country land-wise, and back in the 70s it was growing like crazy. And in 1940 we were about like 10 square miles. That's not very large at all, and the city was sprawling out in every direction. And leaders realized they had no real way to hear from regular people about what gets built where. And somebody downtown was totally different, has totally different needs than somebody maybe 20 miles out. So the city carved itself into chunks called urban villages. And the idea, is each village should have a mix of homes and jobs, so you could live, work, and be within your area for your errands, close to home, instead of like driving across town. or across the whole valley for everything. And each village got its own committee of residents. And that's where we saw a village planning committee come about, or we'll commonly say probably, you'll hear us say VPC, meaning village planning committees. And these villages each got their own village planning committee to weigh in on what happens in their corner of town. And one piece worth holding on to is that the plan never wanted, one all important downtown originally. So we see that today is one important place, a node, central downtown. But the original plan was not to have one important hyper focused area. And the plan actually imagined a whole constellation of centers, often I like to call like barrios. So, and we've gotten away from that, unfortunately. So, back in 1974, the city kicks off a big study, right? And brings like 200 plus residents to weigh in and on what they would like to see for, creating these village urban delineations on a map. And then finally in 1979, they adopt a plan. They draw the first like 9 villages. We have 15 today, but at that time in 1979, it was 9 villages that were drawn on a map. And then in the early 80s, the committees themselves start meeting. It was only 5 at first that were running by like 1981. And the rest filled in like after that. And the original 9 were the established central parts of town, like places like Encanto, Maryville, Camelback East, South Mountain. And the newer ones were, out on the edges, like Ahwatukee, Desert View, and Levine got added as the city just grew outwards. And really something that's interesting that a lot of people get wrong about village planning committees is that village planning committees, we do not have, me as serving on one, I say we do not have the final say on anything. We're strictly advisory. So our job is to look at a project, talk it through in public, and then, make a recommendation. Essentially thumbs up, thumbs down, some comments on, ideally what we would like to see or not see, or suggestions, or even recommend conditions, but nothing is binding on our advisory capacity to these projects that we may see come through, or if it's like a text amendment for policy changes. So that recommendation gets passed up the chain. It's a voice, essentially, not a veto, or, an all-encompassing, like, powerful change that could happen. But here's why it still matters. So in the early voice of, and a very influential one from village planning committees, folks who do make the call genuinely read these recommendations. So, when a project just sells through a VPC, it can look a whole lot different than one that walks into, a room. And what we're trying to do actually in a lot of these situations is educate the public as much as possible, is what I'm trying to get at here. And some projects do sell through, and a lot of times they may just not have had, a very strong body and number of folks at that VPC, but also not a lot of people attending publicly at the VPCs. And I don't mean sales through like it just gets no opposition. It just doesn't get maybe the feedback that it deserved. And we do have issues with quorum in quite a few of the VPCs, village planning committees, with the number of people, you need to meet to actually have a vote. And so really, and I'll tie this, I'll finish up here on kind of like this whole history. So mostly there's 3 things that, a village planning committee does. We look at rezones. We also look at text amendments. And we have an annual work plan that we come up in towards the end of maybe like December or beginning of the year in January, where we say these are the things that we want to focus on. It could be bike lanes. It could be street safety also, like with high visibility crosswalks. It could even be, hey, we want to see more mixed use development. That means like businesses and housing together, which makes a community more walkable. And those are things that village planning committee will try to educate themselves on more that year and see how they could obtain maybe certain speakers to come and engage and educate with the public. and also maybe even have some goals that are established with the planning and development department where they can actually implement some short-term and long-term goals and like, hey, we really want to see high visibility crosswalks here in this part of town, especially since we have a lot of kids coming, going to school. What is a plan we could devise? And well, let's bring in streets department, for instance, and start really working on this and hashing it out. That is actually a really big component of village planning committees that is often not exercised, not because village planning committees don't want to do it. It's really because it's not always that obvious or aware to village planning committees that they have that that role and that power. And when it comes to text amendments, think of that as like policy changes. So changes to like actual rules on zoning code for like citywide. And that's another thing VPCs can review and make suggestions on. Not necessarily, it's even up for debate if they could even really vote on it. But that's just one way, I guess, they could show the majority of that village planning committee agrees or disagrees with a zoning thing, as well as I mentioned, like rezones and they could put conditions on like, hey, we like to see solar panels on your development, but none of that is anything that a community could make binding on that property owner of that zoning rezone project. And before I pass it over back to Stephen, why is it so like hard to build homes here real quick too on in Phoenix in general? Why does everything look kind of the same maybe, or even, really don't, there's projects we see that start but maybe never evolve or develop. Really, I think a lot of it has to do culturally. We've put a lot of power into our village planning committees to be where it's a place where people have more, those people with more time and capacity can serve on them and also show up because they're only in person. And they were virtual for a couple of years during COVID, but they're only in person. And there's often a challenge for folks who cannot speak English. Maybe they're, hearing impaired, or the English is not their first language. There's not that easy availability of translation services. But we do see that with our planning commission, which sits above village planning committees, and they do have virtual and in-person options, and they have to hear all the same cases anyway that the VPCs do. And we do have folks that show up that can use and have used the translation services during public comment for these projects. However, we don't have presentations done in Spanish or maybe for someone who's hearing impaired. I believe that those options are available, but they have to notify the city planning department 5 days in advance. So a lot of times things just get developed how they are because it's not always those who are maybe most impacted that really get to have a say in it. And it's going to often be those who have time and capacity to show up to these meetings that really are the most, the voices that carry the loudest, and that we often hear when we, look at some of the recent text amendment proposals for policy changes. So anyways, with that, Stephen, if folks have questions, I could answer in the chat as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. I think that overview really helps establish like the sort of important foundation of VPCs and kind of how they fit into that broader sort of planning process. But also, I think maybe we can dig into a little bit more later in the Q&A, like how there's a cultural element to this politically. But of course, understanding the structure is only part of the story, right? What does participation actually look like? Who shows up? How, like kind of how you were touching on, how are discussions shaped? What factors influence committee decisions? And we have the perfect panelist to help us answer those questions. I would like to now turn things over to Paris Wallace, who will share their firsthand experience serving on a VPC and really giving us kind of that member's first person view of things. Paris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. It's really important. In fact, at our last village planning committee meeting, we had someone from a partner organization come because they are actively recruiting people to join VPCs. And so she wanted to see firsthand what it was like. So it's really exciting that this is happening right now. I have 10 minutes. I'll be quick. My name's Paris Wallace. I use she and her pronouns, and I am former chair of the Estrella Village, and we have elections to choose who's chair and who's co-chair. So I'm former chair, and I got involved in I've been doing community organizing for a really long time, and we had a youth town hall in 2017, 2018 with an organization that I was a part of. And there were lots of questions from young people at the time around parks and accessibility. And I am in the east side of our village, so it's 35th Avenue and McDowell. Um, and a lot of people don't actually realize, that is also District 4, City Council District 4. And so all of these young people are asking all of these questions, and my daughter gets up for a request to speak and says, truthfully, I want to have the park by my house open. I want to be able to take my friends there. I want more trees. It's really hot. She had a laundry list of things that she wanted right at the end of our street, right here. And, as a mom, I was really proud, but I actually didn't realize that it affected the youth as hard as it did, right? And so Laura Pastor ended up appointing me to the village. And I have served since, 2017, 2018. And so we are really trying to make everything over here family accessible, right? And the housing, right? Because I had no idea what to expect. And I actually thought I'd spend most of my time discussing zoning maps, right? When I got onto the village committee, there was, I don't want to sound discouraging, but there was no guidance, right? They gave me a PDF with rules and regulations and said, I'll see you at the next meeting, right? And what? I had no idea. A PHO, I don't even know what that means, right? And so I over the years, I've obviously picked up and learned, but yeah, I thought I'd spend my time discussing zoning maps. And honestly, I navigate a lot of politics, a lot of competing priorities, and trying to determine whose voices are actually being represented, right? I choose to continue to serve because it gives residents a voice in land use. And because I am an old school organizer, I have actually knocked on doors when things are important enough, when things are happening, I will knock on doors. For example, Falcon Park, we were having discussions about it. And I don't know if you've driven by or if you're familiar with the area, but it's beautiful. We have baseball games now, soccer games, people are having birthday parties, right? And I feel like as a member, it just needs to be more transparent, right? Things pop up in our communities and in our neighborhoods, and we don't actually know. We're like, I don't need another tire shop, or I don't need another check cashing place, right? And so it just happens, but there's actually people that either encourage it or discourage it. Um, and yeah, what I was expecting is not what actually was the role. Um, I did not know Robert's rules, which they don't actually tell you need to know. I had never been in that kind of situation, right? We are, we are working class people. I am a working class single mom. I have two kids. And for me, I didn't even know what Robert's rules were. And so I had to learn that. I had to learn it was a steep learning curve, right? I did have to learn about different zoning rules and, all of the amendments. But the way I look at it is I don't look at it from that technical point. I look at it from the point of a community member that is just regular, just so happens to be able to be in that position. So it's a lot of attorneys we're talking to. I thought that we were going to be talking to community and and that we were going to have these discussions. It's actually a lot of land use attorneys. Developers, consultants, engineers come, lobbyists, and then residents with a very specific concern, right? They'll come. And occasionally neighborhood organizations. A neighborhood org came to a couple of our meetings and I ended up applying for a grant. They're giving out free trees, the city of Phoenix, too, right? You learn about stuff in those spaces. I got two brand new trees planted in my front yard by the city, right? And I didn't know that we could do that. We could apply for the grant and have canopies in our neighborhoods if they're not there. And it's in that space we get to have that discussion. Um, you know, the professionals, right, that we meet with or that speak at our meetings, they know this process, right? They understand the language. They're comfortable speaking, right? And they will come and present to us in the most favorable light, right? They're not transparent about what actually the impacts could be, and it's up to the VPC members to ask those questions, right? And so some meetings feel less like a neighborhood. It's funny, they're not neighborhood discussions, they're oral arguments. I think that's the best way I can describe it. They're oral arguments. Um, and those are the people that show up. So that's how all of those random things pop, check cashing, all of those random things are popping up because those are the people that come, right? If we are able to make quorum. And I will say that our last meeting last week, we didn't have because we didn't make quorum. And so a lot of VPCs can't even actually meet because of that. And so that's kind of where Estrella is right now. If one person doesn't show up, then we don't have a meeting. But the staff, the City of Phoenix staff, still has to show up and sit there the entire meeting time, even if nobody shows up. And so that's another person or people that we consider when we're doing these things as VPC members. I want to talk a little about who doesn't show up because I hope in this space we have folks that are like ready and willing to start showing up to these meetings. Uh, the developers themselves never show up. They can never face us. They send their lawyers. They don't show up, right? Renters. I'm speaking solely on Australia, right? Renters don't show up. Working families don't show up. Young people specifically don't show up because we are building out the plan for the next 5 to 10 years. So ideally, we would have young people showing up to help influence that, right? Um, People that need affordable housing, NIMBY voices. We will have NIMBYs out of nowhere show up and say outrageous things that have never come to a meeting before, are there for a hyper-specific reason. And honestly, most people don't know we exist until the project is already happening or the signs go up. Um, you know, I I spoke about how we have a lack of attendance. The more people that show up to our meetings, the more voices are able to influence their specific village. And we are um, we're very cognizant of the fact that, for example, I live 35th Avenue at the highway, 35th Avenue McDowell. I will not make decisions or even really weigh in on things that are happening at 75th and Lower Buckeye because I don't live there. I don't know the terrain. I don't understand what's happening. And so it is not fair for me to weigh in so aggressively in somebody else's neighborhood. So we tend to try and stick with our known areas and not overstep into places that we aren't familiar with. So for me, I stick in the Hayden Park area, which is, yeah, the 10 west or south to 43rd Avenue. I can comfortably talk about those areas. And using plain language is what I do all the time, right? Um, they will, as far as like shaping the conversation goes, not everybody has equal influence, right? Because not everyone has the time, the resources, or expertise to do this. It is a volunteer role, right? It's a volunteer role, but it's actually a full-time volunteer role, especially if you are the chair or co-chair. And that's also something that is really important because you're meeting with these developers and their lawyers, and they are going to go to the planning board and then to city council. But we're the first, I like to say we're the first line of defense, right? We are able to influence who comes in, who is extracting from our neighborhoods, who is contributing to our neighborhoods, right? We're looking at we're looking at people that come in with their project, with their codes, and making sure that everything complies, right? Residents get a few minutes. We get a few minutes to talk, especially if you sign in. Committee members, we sort through all the technical stuff while also considering neighborhood impacts, right? And it's, I don't want to say that everybody's acting in bad faith whenever I talk about developers, but what I do want to say is the participation isn't evenly distributed, right? And I'll give you a couple of examples. I we had a developer come last month to pitch us a data center right here at like 51st or 43rd Avenue in Buckeye, right? Um, and there's very specific criteria that I hold when I'm making a vote, right? It's very specific. It is, like I said, are you extracting? Are you contributing, right? Are you going to be able to hire from within? Now, the data center we said no to, right? They were like, oh, we're going to bring in all of these jobs. And then it was, what happens after it's built? What happens after everybody leaves? The construction is done. Who runs it then? And they said, we will have 48 jobs available. And I love that everything is on the record when we are in our meetings because I will ask the questions that pin developers to think about like, oh, you're extracting resources from our neighborhood. Who's going to work these 48 jobs? Oh, you're bringing someone in from Mesa to man this over here? No, no. There's no jobs for our community. You're bringing people in. You're going to give us security guard jobs? I don't think so, right? And data centers are terrible. But that was the criteria, right? And we also have to think about, yeah, we think about the long term. On some VPCs, I think there's a short term, everything is a little short-sighted. I've noticed, but even on our VPC. But for me, because we have the capital plan that was created in the 90s or the 80s even, we're still we're still building things that they voted on in 93. And it's not, it doesn't work. It's not working. Um, but you know, the long-term community benefit is one of the things that I'm really focusing on. If you come to me and you say, I want to build these houses, right? I want to build this apartment complex. Uh, my first question is, who's going to live there? How much is it going to cost? Low barrier, no barrier? What are we talking here? Right? What are you thinking of for if you have vets, right? I live across the street from a high school. They have drum band practice sometimes at the park, right? Those are like the little things that for me and my role on the VPC, I actively consider, right? I actively consider 10 years from now, where's the core of Australia going to be, right? Those are the decisions that the way that I choose whether I'm voting yes or no. And because everything is on record, I'm gonna jump into I don't know how many more minutes I have, but I have one more thing.
You got, I think we got a couple minutes for you. Extra spare,
Okay,
so
cool.
don't worry.
I'm a yapper, so um, and this is really important because I'm hoping that we can recruit some people to be on the Australia VPC. Um, but yeah, so I want to pull out housing, right? Because this is really big at our VPC right now and in the state. Um, we so when it comes to housing, we all don't agree. Some people on our VPC don't even live in the district, they work there. And so the people that work there or own businesses there also get to weigh in, but they don't actually see what happens after their businesses close, right? And so committee members don't always agree. Some of our committee are those business owners, in fact. We look at density. Are we going to increase the density or are we going to uphold neighborhood character? What are the motives behind everybody that comes to speak to us, right? Um, with the housing, is it affordable housing or is it market rate housing? Is it mixed housing, right? I always push for low barrier, no barrier, but that's not realistic for developers all the time. And trying to balance the immediate neighborhood concerns with the long term is also something that is, for me, it's hard to balance that out, right? Reasonable people can reach different conclusions using all the same information. And some of us don't have the same information. Some of us have more access because we might be retired and we're able to meet with the developers and lawyers, or, they have that flexibility where they're actual developers themselves, right? And so that is that, right? We have gone back and forth as committee members. I have gotten into a little back and forth, right? Because the committee members, we all live in our little bubbles, right? We all live in our little worlds. And my world is Hayden Park, right? It's Carl Hayden High School on over. And so what we need over here is really different, right? We have a lot of children. We have a high school, an elementary school, and a junior high, all within walking distance. If we really, really wanted to put housing there. Now, we did. This is one of the proudest things that I can say in my time on the planning committee. We were able to build new apartments at 35th and McDowell, like on the other side of the highway, right? We have that Quick Trip. Is it Quick Trip? Yeah. Because we had the Circle Ks that never had gas. We had a Circle K next door to a Circle K, across the street from a Circle K. None of them had gas. They always ran out because of the area, right? When people think of the west side or the south, I say South Central West Phoenix because all of the highways meet right there. So I can be anywhere at any time. But yeah, so that's sort of that overview. But for me, like I started sharing, I have a very explicit set of ways that I make decisions, right? And before every vote, I ask, is this consistent with the general plan? Because we do have to stay in line with the general plan, as Nicole discussed, right? Does it improve the quality of life? That's all. Is there going to be shade? Is there going to be, what canopies are going to be there, right? Who's going to benefit from this? Who bears the burden? Right? Who's going to bear that burden? Is it us, community members? What are the long-term consequences, right? You can build an apartment complex. Are you going to put EV charging stations in there? Are you going
Hey,
to,
Paris.
have a dog park? There's
Hey,
all of
Paris.
these little things. Oh, am I over time?
Just a little bit. I'm so sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
We
You're
just want to
fine. You're
be
fine.
respectful of folks' time. So sorry.
Yes. No,
Um,
you're fine.
but thank you so much, though. Like one of the most valuable things about conversations like this is hearing, how the institution functions in practice, not just how they're designed to function on paper. Like this was really enlightening and kind of maddening, actually, to hear some of this. But so, with Paris kind of giving us an inside look at the dynamics, challenges, and realities of serving on a VPC, now I kind of want to zoom out a bit and examine, the system from a longer term perspective. Joe, you previously served on a village planning committee, and you spent considerable time thinking about, what these bodies do well, what they don't do well, where there may be opportunities for some improvement. Joe, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Stephen. And Paris, I would have loved to serve on a village planning committee with you. You are passionate and it shows. So you're amazing. So yeah, let's talk about what's working within VPCs. And look, I probably missed a couple of things. So for the rest of the VPC members, if I'm missing anything, would love to know your thoughts. But just, when we think of the purpose of the VPC, it's that local control. You have a setting that brings the decision making closer to the community. They're not having to drive to City Hall. They're driving, in our case here in Maryvale, they were driving to the community center, which just, has a little bit better accessibility. More people are able to participate in that process, and it's a little less daunting. And so just bringing that power closer to the community was important. Another thing that I think it works really well within the VPC process is that it improves projects. So I can't tell you the amount of times that during the, when a zoning attorney would come and present a project and we're asking questions and even providing some feedback on a project, how, we were able to refine that project to better fit the needs of our community. So it really does make things better. And so I really appreciate that part of the VPCs. And then it also creates a certain level of transparency. So you got to remember, all applicants have to publicly explain what they're proposing. They have to answer questions, and they have to, respond directly to residents who are participating, during maybe a point of public comment during those meetings. So has that sort of level of transparency where we're able to have the conversation and all kind of come to the table to discuss these different projects that are coming through. And then it gives the ordinary residents a voice. We talked about bringing that local, bringing it closer to home. But for many, that's their first opportunity to engage in this sort of process. Paris talked a little bit about it. It's very daunting to hear the different language that's spoken in City Hall. Some of it does make its way down to the VPCs, but because the VPC is made up of folks who are volunteers, a lot of the times we will ask the clarifying question: what did you mean by that? Can you explain that? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But where could we do better? Where could VPCs do better? And I think it's the public engagement. I think maybe Nicole and Paris touched on this. It's the, often we have public engagement when there's, something that we don't want in our back, in our communities. And whether it's a data center or a project that, we would rather have some housing at, whatever it may be, a lot of the times it happens too late. So the engagement happens too late. The other thing is that the information, isn't always easy to understand. Planning documents can have hundreds of pages. If you've ever seen a packet for those planning documents, they are very long and filled with technical language. We shouldn't have to expect residents to become zoning experts overnight. We need to figure that out and make that, improve that. And then, there's the uneven participation. And what I mean by that is some meetings will have dozens of speakers. You'll have a line out the door on something that's coming to the VPC, and others have none. no public comment. That means that recommendations sometimes only reflect the voices of those who have the resources or the means or the time to participate. We know life is lifing, right? And there might be an issue that the community really cares about, but because of the environment, the economy, the situation that we live in, whether it's childcare barriers, transportation barriers, that doesn't always allow your every resident to come and participate in this process. So, and then I think another thing is the committee members have limited resources. Paris touched on this, that we're all volunteers making recommendations on complex projects. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we could do better and some of the reforms, but the training on the technical aspects of being a VPC member is critical. I want to talk a little bit about structural issues and what we could focus on. And I would say two things. Representation. So our communities are made up of very diverse groups of people, and I think we should be asking ourselves the questions: do our VPCs reflect the people that live in them? So do we have enough renters? Do we have enough homeowners? Do we have enough young adults, enough parents, small business owners, working families, longtime residents, and maybe working professionals from diverse backgrounds? These are the people that are our neighbors, and these are the people that I think should participate in these VPCs. Another thing is the second is the transparency, and I'll share an example that really shaped my perspective. There was a proposed development in the West Valley, and before the public hearing, I met with the applicant's zoning attorney, which is pretty normal part of the process. As we walked through the proposal, there were a lot of discussions about the retail, the housing amenities. There was even going to be a soccer field that would serve the community. But there were two buildings on the site plan that I couldn't get clear answers to. I kept asking for additional information, and I didn't think that I had enough information to make an informed decision. So eventually, after several follow-up questions, I learned that one of the buildings was intended to be a technology center, and the second building was going to be owned by the federal government and was going to remain empty. They were going to figure out what was going to happen with that building. Red flags all around. So obviously, at that point, my questioning started to change. Those could have, significant implications for the surrounding community. So I believed because with that additional information, it required a much deeper conversation. What that experience taught me was that it's our responsibility. Our responsibility isn't to accept a presentation at face value. It's to ask questions that residents, if they were sitting in the seat, what would they ask, right? And so a couple lessons here to take away from this experience. It's ask the questions that haven't been answered. Some of the most important information isn't volunteered within the first 5 minutes. We have to keep asking. If we don't understand it, ask the question. I think when I became chair in December 2024 and then left the seat in about July 2025, so served for a couple of months, always had quorum. I would call my members, hey, I'll see you at the meeting. But we focus on two things: streamlining the process and really looking for the most important information, to extract the most important information so we can make the best informed decisions. And I think with that in mind, we were able to, get out of there. It's going to be surprising to some, but before like 9 p.m. That might seem like a long time, but we would in some cases have things rolled over because of the quorum issues that we had prior to becoming chair. And so the second thing is that we should understand projects so well that we could go and talk to our neighbors about it and explain to them, hey, there's this project happening out in the West Valley. This is what they're looking to do. This is what they're wanting to bring. What are your thoughts on it? And so if you're able to explain a project in sort of layman's terms and your neighbors understand it, then that's a great thing. And so we want to make sure that that is something that kind of continues. And then we talked about, what are some of the reforms? Look, it is the training, it is training. Every committee member should receive ongoing training on zoning, land use, infrastructure, environmental impacts, and how to evaluate complex projects. I think that with that training, with those tools, with those resources, I'm confident we could have VPC members that feel a little bit more confident in their ability to participate in the process. So with that, Stephen, that's all I have.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, one thing, kind of before I go on, sorry, when you talk about we should be able to know kind of the ins and outs of this and this stuff before we can talk to a neighbor about it or make, ask questions, kind of demand.
Yeah.
I love the idea of making them make you understand what they're talking about in their technical lingo.
Yeah.
Don't let that uncomfortability of not knowing just escape everybody.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for that. And I think kind of one thing that emerges from all these perspectives is that VPCs obviously matter, but they're only one part of that broader civic engagement ecosystem, right? For many attendees, the question kind of here in my own self and those who will be watching this is, what can I actually do with this information, right? So, to kind of help answer that question, I want to bring it back to Nicole before we can hopefully get a couple questions in to discuss kind of the practical ways residents can engage in the planning process and advocate for housing in their communities. Nicole, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for a couple things that I want to inform folks on is that village planning committee meetings could still actually meet when they don't even have quorum, but they don't. And it's a common misconception that they cannot meet if they don't have quorum. And this is not at any fault to the VPC. This is just new realization actually for VPCs. So it's going to take folks informing the city, especially we just heard Paris say, hey, I mean, the planner that oversees that village planning committee, the planner who works for the city of Phoenix, is still there in person for that hour, at least a minimum. I think they're supposed to sit there maybe like 15, but it doesn't matter, whatever, they're still there. And people, arrange their time around these VPCs to come and present. The only thing that a VPC cannot do if there's not quorum, they can't vote, but they can still have a meeting. So I want to encourage folks to push back on anytime there's not quorum to still have a meeting, because there's even people coming there to do presentations on maybe, it could be on anything street related, even maybe a project going on with a local school or a business coming. These are opportunities that are lost oftentimes if we still don't have these meetings. Now, another interesting thing too is that village planning committees can also have presentations from non-city people, non-developers, and this is also something that is overlooked or just people are not well informed about. And unfortunately, recently, I serve on Encanto. I tried to diligently work to get a very smart and savvy coalition that wanted to present to Encanto Village Planning Committee on bike lanes along Osborne that we've been waiting for maybe like close to 20 years to get, and would like to get an update on, where the rest of these bike lanes along Osborne in our area. And we had a person that was ready to do a great presentation in order to engage with the committee and get feedback. And they had stats, a beautiful presentation. But the city had told our chair that this presentation cannot be done by someone who's not working with the city or not a developer. And that to me was just really wild. So I did some digging around, and it's actually the city cannot push back on a chair of a village planning committee who would like to have someone come and present on something that relates to what the village planning committee is supposed to be working on, what they're supposed to, do with their urban core. So keep that in mind too. If you know of any nonprofits, coalitions, or even individuals who are they're subject matter experts on something that relates to developing community. Like I said, this was on bike lanes, that's developing community. Really push back on this having these conversations with the city if you can, or have these village planning committees become aware of this. And this is stuff that Valley Urban Action Alliance and Urban Phoenix Project we have on our websites, by the way. Also, I'll play bad cop here, even though I've served on a village planning committee, and it is, something that I take seriously. I've served on it since like 2018. I'm not a fan of village planning committees for those reasons of they're not very accessible. And also we're not able to do the things that I think we should do, is like having some of these other projects we work on, not just developer focused ones. But keep in mind also that developers can be folks like you and I, just average folks who can go and get a loan, and maybe they are from your community and they want to build something that's great for that community, or that they perceive as great, and I'm sure it is. But oftentimes these projects that these smaller developers like you and I have die before they even get to the VPCs. Why? Because going through the VPC process can take a couple months at minimum. And we even see churches who want to start doing like cottage courts or something that is not zoned for their area. Maybe some middle housing, to help with the whole housing supply. And some of these folks that are just depending on volunteers from their community, architects who are volunteering their time, maybe even attorney who volunteer their time, or even the developers do something, show up when it's people like you and I that are smaller doing their own presentations. And it could be a very cost burden thing. So believe it or not, here's something that's going to sound provocative. But according to city code, actually, rezone cases are not required to go through village planning committees. And I'm actually okay with that, because they have to go through the planning commission no matter what. And they have to go through that at least a couple times to present, and then later come back for a vote from that planning commission. And like I said earlier, the planning commissions are more accessible. They're available virtually, in person. They have translation services, unlike our VPCs. Not to discount VPCs for other projects, but we oftentimes kill projects before they even come, not intentionally, just that it takes a lot of time and cost and resources to go through the city, different little steps, VPCs, planning commission, then council at the end. So anyways, keep that in mind too, how maybe this is something that not all projects really should be coming through VPCs. They can be invited to present. A chair can put on their agenda of a VPC that, yeah, we like to hear about your project. And that's great if they do want to come and do that and they have the time and resources. But culturally, our city council is adamant about projects coming through VPCs, and it's not actually required, believe it or not, for rezones. So I'm playing the bad cop maybe for some. I think it's, something we should really seriously consider and talk about in the future more on what are appropriate things that should actually be coming through the VPCs. And yes, always challenge what the system serves. So please get involved with village planning committees. Get to know which ones they are. I believe dropped in the chat, Annalise put in there, you can find out which district you're in. But know that right now, if they don't meet quorum, they're probably not going to meet, but push back on that. That's something that we need more folks to talk about. Hey, we want to hear that presentation about XYZ, whatever it is, even if it didn't require a vote. A presentation could occur that was already planned. And if it does require a vote, then the vote just cannot happen if there's not quorum, but the presentation still can. So it's something that I'm challenging folks to, if you have the time capacity, shoot that email over like, hey, there's not quorum, but I'm pretty sure you can still have quorum. And you can still do your presentations. You just can't vote. That's all. And with that too, I'll just close out with, getting involved and the Planning Commission's a very important venue to, if you have the time and capacity. I attend virtually. I just don't have time to go down to, it's at the council chambers in downtown to do those meetings. They are long at times, but it is where, things are well documented, well presented. And in the big guys, the ones that can't afford those zoning attorneys that we heard Paris talk about that are very intimidating and gaslight the public quite often, in my opinion, in my experience, they do get appropriately challenged by planning commissioners who are also volunteers, just like we see on village planning committees. And if you're very interested in joining, go through the process of figuring out of like, hey, there's planning commission boards and commission application. You put your resume attached to it. It's all online. You could put it in and email your council member that you put it in and follow up with them continuously if you have to. Oftentimes we don't see people get appointed for several months after they put in their application. And sometimes we never hear back from them. Very well educated folks, but don't give up. Because today's panel and people who are attending these discussions and conversations oftentimes are the people who do not give up. They're very persistent, and that's just the biggest piece of advice I could give is don't give up, even if you're shot down. So yeah, and Stephen, please tell people to subscribe to our newsletter too. That's a big way for folks to get involved.
That's right. Thank you so much. We are almost at time. There is one question in the chat. It was already answered, but I kind of want to just have it for the audio. Saman asked, are the VPCs grouped by city council districts? And no, they're not. They're not based on council districts. There are sort of overlapping council districts within many of the village planning committees. How exactly that is determined, like geographically, how they kind of square that circle, I'm not entirely sure. If that's something, Nicole, you can give a quick sort of 30-second answer to if you by chance know, or Paris or Joe.
It's really like that whole node concept. It's VPCs were created and the boundaries can change. I don't know when the last time the boundaries can change, but Saman's question was great. And Saman, thank you for always coming to these. Saman is one of our star volunteers for the Urban Phoenix Project. But some VPCs do entirely fall within one council district. Like we see Ahwatukee is all in, District 6. But oftentimes it's based on economic hubs are, like the areas where they want to see people live, work, and play. And that can shift over time. Like it might actually change for some districts in the close to like the North West Phoenix. There's interest in changing some of the boundaries of those VPCs because economic hub development might be shifting a little bit. But commonly think of it that way. I'm not the best at really telling about those boundaries, but that's more or less the concept of them.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're at time. There's still so much we can talk about, which is kind of, I did not expect to think about when it comes to village planning committees, I got to be honest. But anyway, so as we wrap up, I just really want to thank our panelists, Nicole, Paris, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experiences with us tonight. I also want to thank everyone who joined, whether you're a resident, planner, advocate, or just someone who's curious. Your participation helps build a more informed public conversation around housing. Housing policy can sometimes feel too technical or inaccessible, but the decisions that shape our communities ultimately belong to all of us, right? Understanding how those decisions are made is the first step toward improving them. If tonight's discussion sparked your interest, we encourage you to stay involved. Please take a moment to sign up for the Urban Phoenix Project newsletters, follow our organizations on social media, that is Urban Phoenix Project and Valley Urban Action Alliance. Attend future webinars in the Phoenix Housing Lab series. Our next Phoenix Housing Lab is Thursday, July 30th at 6 p.m. And as well as our Urban Phoenix Project monthly volunteer meeting is next Tuesday, July 7th at 5:30 p.m. I believe Anna will be dropping some links in the chat, perhaps. But more importantly, engage wherever you can. If you have questions about where to engage, how to engage, we are always available. Shoot us an email. Reach out to us via social media. Thank you all again for joining us this evening.